Giulio Ercolessi, and I'm a member of the board of the European Humanist Federation, that is the alliance of the secularist organizations in Europe. And also I'm a member of the board of the European Liberal Forum, which is the organization of the think tanks that are connected to the ALDE party, that is the European Party of the Liberals.
Thank you very much. Can you please tell me, in your opinion, is Italy a secular state?
Oh, it used to be when it was first created as a nation, because in order to create a new nation out of the many states in which Italy was divided in the 19th century, we, the Italian liberals, had to oust the Pope from temporary power. So until 1929, it was as secular as France is today. And then the fascist regime converted it into a much more clerical country. They stipulated a concordate with the Catholic Church that was unfortunately related to in the Constitution of 1948 with the vote of the Christian Democrats and the Communists. So there was this mention of the concordate, and there's been a big discussion of what it meant. In the end, the Constitutional Court decided that laïcité, that is separation of church and state, is a supreme principle in the Italian Constitution. That means that it could not be changed even with a modification of the Constitution. It would be the change of regime. And in principle, we are a secular state. But the implementation of the principle is very, very, very poor. So nowadays there is a huge contradiction between a society that is more and more secularized. People are not following the teaching of the Catholic Church in their actual life, and the state that is more and more giving resources to the Catholic Church. So the answer is yes and no. On paper we are a secular state, a state based upon the principle of laïcité, and at the same time we are financing in a lot of ways the Catholic Church. They have a privileged position as far as, for example, religious symbols are concerned, and at the same time the society is less and less following the teaching of the Church.
So even though your citizens are no longer that much interested in religion and you do have a separation of state and church, still the politicians choose to fund the church? Or how does it work? Why do they do that, and how do they do that?
Yes, in fact, politicians very much like organized groups of voters. And the those who do not follow the teaching of the Catholic Church are, of course, the non-believers, and like in every Western European state, but probably also in all the European states, those who are either non-believers or less and less believers are more and more numerous. Then, especially in Italy, like in many other countries of Catholic heritage, we have the phenomenon that has been described as the submerged schism by a Catholic theologian, Pietro Prini, that died a few years ago. He wrote this book on the submerged schism. What is the submerged schism? It's made of all those tens and tens of millions of Catholics that are Catholics because that describe themselves as Catholics because they were born in a country of Catholic tradition, and at the same time they do not follow the teaching of the Catholic Church. They are almost indifferent, especially to the sexual teaching of the Catholic Church, and at the same time they think vaguely, more or less vaguely, that there is a God, given that they are born in a country of Catholic tradition. They say they are Catholic, they know nothing more or less about Catholic theology, much less than a committed secularist usually knows.
And what are the ways of funding church in Italy?
That's very interesting, you know. Well, first of all, there's a huge number of laws, regulations, municipal arrangements, regional laws that are not directly intended to finance the Catholic Church, but in practice they finance organizations that can only belong to the Church. In a very minor financing is given to the minority churches. Traditionally in Italy we only had a very tiny Protestant church and a very tiny Jewish minority. Of course nowadays there's a much more plural situation because of immigration, because of pluralism, because people are more and more diverse as a consequence of the new technologies, new religious movements and so on. But if you asked an official politician or an official member of the church hierarchy, he would probably answer that it is very free, because each year when you present your personal income tax statement, you are allowed to sign for different options. That is, you can give 0.8% of the general income, not your own personal tax revenue, but the general income that the state receives from personal taxation, either to the Catholic Church or to the state, or to one of those minority churches that have an agreement with the state. In practice, the things are very different, but no Italian knows this. But very few Italians know. If I sign, my signature is considered as a vote. That means that it is valid also for those who do not sign at all. The consequence of this is that given that the state does not ask people to vote for him or for it, and there is, on the contrary, a very strong advertising campaign by the Catholic Church, usually more or less 40% of the Italian taxpayers sign for one of the different options. Of these 40%, about 32% sign for the Catholic Church. 5-6% sign for the state. Not many people trust the way the state is spending the money that is given to them, so giving it more money that it would actually take from taxation is not very fashionable, let's say. The other option are minority churches. And in fact, it is very curious to say that we have a very tiny Protestant church, the Waldensian Church. It is the church, the most ancient church of the Reformation in a sense, because it had been in existence as a heretic sect for 3 centuries before joining the Reformation in the 16th century. That is a very liberal church because it was persecuted for centuries by the Catholic Church. So it's very much in favor of separation of church and state, and it is very liberal concerning individual rights. The joke that our friends inside of this church are usually telling is that they are the only church of Christianity that is mostly supported by atheists and gays. And that's because most of us prefer to give it for the charities that are rigorously non-religious that are financed through this mechanism by the Waldensian Church than giving it to the state, or of course to the Catholic Church. But as I said, these signatures are considered like votes that decide also for those who do not decide. The consequence is that if 32% of the 40% who do make an option sign for the Catholic Church takes 80% of the general part of the taxation that is allocated through this 0.8% mechanism. So in practice, it is the bulk of it finishes in the hands of the Catholic Church. And this is only a tiny part of it because, as I said, there are a lot of other laws that indirectly have the same consequence. For example, there are some kinds of regional laws or municipal regulations that obviously can only apply to the biggest church. And so we have estimated, no one knows the exact numbers, and nobody is able probably to estimate them, but roughly speaking, we think that more or less 8 billion euros are given yearly either to the Catholic Church or to institutions or organizations that are linked to the Catholic Church. And this, of course, includes private Catholic schools, private Catholic hospitals, usually working as providers for the National Health Service, and so on and so on and so on.
Does it include also funding of lessons of Catholic religion at schools, or do you not have that in Italy?
You said Catholic schools?
No. Catholic religion lessons in public schools.
Yes. As far as yes, we had no teaching of religion in high schools in Italy until the fascist period. And this was introduced with the Concordat of 1929 that says that the teaching of the Catholic doctrine is the founding and the crowning of public education. This lasted until the Concordat was renewed in 1986 by the socialist Prime Minister Bettino Craxi. The fascist was the one who introduced the Concordat, and the socialist was the one who renewed it, not the Christian Democrats, as one would expect. Anyway, since then, the religious teaching is optional. That means that at the beginning of the school year, you can decide not to, as they say, take profit of the religious teaching in public schools. As a consequence, you don't have a duty to attend any teaching. On paper, the school should provide an alternative teaching, or at least the timetable should be organized in such a way that those who do not attend religious teaching could enter in the school an hour later or get out an hour earlier. In practice, it is seldom organized like this, even though the number of those that decide not to attend the religious courses is growing by the year, especially in high schools. So this is a very highly debated issue in the school policies of Italy nowadays.
Well, we have a similar situation in Poland, but also our religion class is funded by the government. Is it the same in Italy?
Yes, it's part of the Concordat, and so the state is paying the teachers of Catholic religion, even though it is not choosing them. And there is also an even worse situation. because years ago there was a big scandal because one of these teachers that must have the approval of the local bishop remained pregnant. And as a consequence, she was fired. So the single mother with his newborn child had remained without any job. And what was the reply by the Italian state? Very simple. We hire this teacher for other subjects that he or she could be able to teach. The new law was passed by Parliament, and so if the Catholic Church decides that because of his or her moral conduct or because of her changing beliefs, a teacher of religion is no longer fit for teaching religion according to the local bishop, he or she should be hired by the state without the normal procedures and with a privilege in comparison with all the others waiting to be hired by the state as teachers for teaching another sort of subject that is within the professional capacity of this teacher. The consequence is that on paper, if the Catholic Church dismissed all its teachers of religion, the Catholic Church could have all the teachers in the Italian schools, because we would be obliged to automatically hire them to teach, say, history, philosophy, or whatever other subject is taught in schools.
That's a very weird regulation.
Everything is usually a little bit weird in Italy, as you know.
Well, what if such person doesn't have education? I mean, it would not be able to teach any other subject. Does it ever happen?
To my knowledge, it never happened. But you know, a degree in theology is considered equivalent to a degree in social sciences or humanities, and so it's very unlikely that he or she is not considered fit for teaching one of those subjects.
I also wanted to ask you, what is the situation with Islam in Italy?
Well, it's still a little bit new for us because, as you know, Italy used to be like Poland in the past century, a land of emigration rather than immigration. The phenomenon started in the 80s. By the way, the largest religious minority within the immigrant communities is not Islam at the moment. It is the Eastern Orthodox churches, but they are very quiet because they don't want to have any colonization in the territories belonging to the Orthodox Church, so they are very low. They keep a very low profile in the countries where they are not a traditional majority. As far as Islam is concerned, we have a similar situation of many other European states. The so-called Union of Italian Islamic Communities, a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, that means that it is a rather fundamentalist organization. There are some minority less fundamentalist organizations, including some that really do not pose any problems to the state-religion relationship, but they are quite minority communities. We have no agreement between the state and any of these Muslim organizations, because the Italian state is expecting to sign an agreement. This has been the policy of our governments for 2 decades now, only with a unitarian representation which is, in my opinion, not the best possible choice, because we could very well do the same thing that we did with the different Protestant denominations and have agreements, given that the Concordat exists and we should not discriminate on the basis of religion. We could have an agreement with those organizations that do not pose any problems. They are minority, but it would probably be a wise choice to privilege them rather than expecting a unitarian delegation where the fundamentalists would have the majority. Also because they will be entitled, when they have an agreement, to take profit of the same mechanism of financing them that I described a little bit earlier. So from the formal point of view, they have no agreement with the state. Most of these immigrants are non-practicing, but those who are practicing are in a way led to take part in this majority organization that is linked to the Muslim Brotherhood and that is more or less the only present organization that they have at disposal. And of course that is not healthy in my opinion. However, we don't have the Muslim ghettos that they have in France, for example, for a very unintentional reason. That is that in the 60s and 70s, the Italian state was not as efficient as the French state, for example, in building public housing for the working class. And you know, now the reason why these religious ghettos exist, for example, in the French suburbs, is because they have taken the place of those public housing that were meant for the French working class in the 60s and 70s. The Italian state was not so efficient in building such public housing. As a consequence, 80% of Italians today are owner of their own flat, and as a consequence there is very little geographical mobility or willing to be mobile on the territory on the part of the Italians. But another consequence is that we have not that kind of ghettos, and at least from the urbanistic point of view, the situation is a little bit more integrated than it is in France or, say, for example, in Britain or the Netherlands. The point is that the Italian state has never decided what kind of policy to use with the immigrating communities. We didn't make a choice as it has been made, for example, in France, integration on an individual basis, and blindness of the Republic on the identity of individuals, even though, of course, it doesn't work in the same way at the societal level. Neither did we make the opposite choice that was made by Britain or the Netherlands, that is, integrating communities. But in the absence of a precise choice made by the state, communitarian integration is the natural choice. You know, it's more or less like the Italians emigrating to America 1 or 1.5 centuries ago, where they only found, the only integrating agencies that they found were those offered by the Sicilian mafia. So even if they were not from Sicily, or they came from regions where organized crime didn't exist at all, given that the only organizations where they were allowed some sort of welfare organization were those provided by the Sicilian mafia, and they were, let's say, second class, they were accepted as second class members in that kind of organizations, and it took 1 or 2 generations for them to get rid of this. So the situation is more or less similar when you don't have any integration policies. The other bad thing, I think, is that the Italian state has bet on the so-called interreligious dialogue as a way of integrating religious minorities. As a consequence, you know, there are a lot of people that are escaping from the countries of Muslim tradition, not just because they are economic migrants or because they are openly persecuted, but, for example, because they are fed up with the culture of their origin. They would like a more liberal, more a freer society than that they come from. And among these, there's a lot of non-believers that dare not say that they are not believers in a country of Muslim tradition, or that a lot of gay people, for example. They are camouflaging in this big wave of emigration towards Italy and the rest of Western Europe. And what is the Italian state doing? They are, in a way, suggesting them that they should be represented in this inter-religious dialogue that is the surrogate for the lack of integration policies by those self-appointed, often fundamentalist imams of the main organization of what could be already said to be an Italian Islam, and that is not healthy in my opinion, of course.
Yes, that's a very good point, actually. We've been noticing it happening in most of the Western countries, that there are so many immigrants from Muslim countries who are really not religious, and they are kind of forced to still feel Muslims because of the way we impose it on them back. It's a huge mistake of our countries. Well, since we've been speaking about immigration, I would like to ask you to comment on one more thing. There are these groups of people who are fleeing from the war in Libya, reaching southern Italy in huge numbers. How would you comment on this? What can Italy do? What is Italy doing? What can do and what should do, in your opinion?
Well, there was a mass rescuing operation until a few months ago that was called Mare Nostrum, and that was led by the Italian Navy. They rescued a lot of people that otherwise would die. Now this operation has expired. It has been substituted by a European operation that is called Triton, but they are not going to rescue people up to the limits of the territorial waters of the states they are escaping from. They are just preventing, the aim would be preventing these people from reaching Western Europe. And of course the result is a tragedy, because many of these people are dying at sea. And probably we should have a totally different kind of European policy towards immigration. We should probably try to have these people come to Europe with much more civilized means than they do. We should have open doors to those asking for asylum. We should probably first of all try to rescue people that are risking to die at sea, and we should have a different migration policy on a European scale, with as far as the problem of economic migrants is concerned. But of course this would require politicians that would not be just thinking of populist politicians, and that would be at the height of their values. And usually you don't have neither in Italy nor in the rest of Europe today, people that would confront populist movements and populist politicians as they would deserve. So for the moment, we are just witnessing a tragedy that is going on. Politicians thinking that they can solve the problem by preventing migrations, but there's no precedent in the history of mankind where you can prevent such forms of migration since antiquity up to our times. So it is naive, in my opinion, thinking that you can stop the wave, purely and simply.
Thank you very much for the interview. I'm sure our public would like to see you soon again in our television. Thank you, and good luck with all the good job that you're doing in Italy.
Thank you very much, and good luck for the job you're doing in Poland.
Thank you.